Hey, how's it going, everyone? Before we get started into this next episode, I want to give everyone a quick reminder that there is now merch available from Falconry Chronicles. If you go to my website at falconrychronicles.com, there's a new store link that's up there. I have had some designs up for a little while now, but I also just put some new ones up there recently. So there's now dark shirt and light shirt options available in lots of different designs. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out and you've been wanting some merch, then please do so. Every sale obviously goes a long way towards the longevity and sustainability of the podcast into the future. And also, if you've been wanting some extra content and haven't had a chance to check it out yet, give the extras content a try. Just go to the Would You Like to Support link on my website there at falconrychronicles.com as well, and sign up for the extras membership. It's $10 a month, and it gets you at least 2 extra episodes each month, one of which will most likely be a video episode as well. So, like I said, I'm doing my best to earn you all's continued support and extra support. So, like I said, every sale and every membership contributes a lot towards the sustainability of the podcast. So if you all want to continue to hear things going into the future and help me continue to bring you new content each week, then head to the website and either pick up some merch or sign up for the membership. Really appreciate your support. And now, on to this next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
So I rehabbed her, up through the early to late spring, and then I had to just go ahead and mulch her. And I had to build a new feather bridge because it looked like those feathers were never going to come back into that joint, the originals. And that fall, I was trying to get her to go up, and she could fly a little bit, but there was just this one day we had this cool wind coming in, and she just got some lift, and she went up like 100 feet. And I served her something, I can't remember what it was, rewarded her. No, I had her on the kite, that's what it was. I had her on the kite. And that's when I thought, well, maybe I got something I can work with here. And so I kept raising that kite. I got her going up like 300-400 feet. We started hawking ducks. That season, I caught 50 ducks with that bird.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. And we're still in Texas. We're going to be here off and on for just a little bit. I'm trying to get through the rest of the THA episodes that were recorded at the THA meet earlier this year in Lubbock. Still got a handful more of those left to get out to you all, but like I said, we'll be here off and on for a few more episodes at least. And this episode was another one, though, that was recorded while there, and Don was nice enough to take a morning out of his schedule flying a couple of Tundra Peregrines that he had at the time and talk about some of the birds he's flown. He's got a lot of experience flying long wings and dirt hawking, and he's also rehabbed some birds as well, and he's also sponsored some other notable names in the falconry community too. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right into this episode and hope you enjoy. Here we go. What have you been doing at the meet so far? Have you gotten out with anybody yet, or?
Yeah, I have 2 Tundra Peregrines.
Yeah.
One that I trapped and trained. The other one was trapped by another falconer. He flew that bird for the first season and just couldn't make it happen with that bird. And I said, man, and I knew how this guy thinks. He's going to release that bird. I called him up at the tail end of the season. I said, don't release it. Just let me have it. And let me see what I can do with it. So I molted her. And boy, she had not connected the dots. I had to start over with her literally that fall. But, within a month, we were catching ducks. And so I was able to put my stamp on her more or less. And now we're, I've had that bird for about 5 years now, 4 years, and the other one about 7 years.
Nice.
So,
yeah, I've noticed that, especially with the long wingers, and I mean, this goes pretty much stays true for most of the falconer and ostringer, demographic. And I think the more that each passing year that you're involved in falconry, people learn the value of what it means to truly end up with a really good bird. And I've noticed that long wingers, especially, once they end up having a really, really good falcon or two, they fly those birds for as long as they possibly can.
And I'm not, any spring chicken. I really don't want to go down and trap another one and go through the stress of training it, of possibly losing it, because that training period, the entering period, that's fraught with risk. And I've got 2 made falcons. I'm like, why would I want to change that up? Mm-hmm. So in fact, I actually entertained trapping another one this year or this last fall. I was thinking, well, I'll maybe train it up. And if it really turns out attitude wise to be a better bird than one of my other 2, I might release one of the others. But I changed my mind on all that. I said, the heck with that. Why would I do that? I'm just going to hold on to what I have. But, before I got into long winging, I was a dyed-in-the-wool Harris hawker. Oh, my God. We used to have rabbits. Lubbock still has a good number of rabbits, but from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we had so many rabbits out there. And so I just loved it. And, you walk through an open field with a bird on your fist, and flush a rabbit. And before the impulse even gets to your brain that a rabbit is just flushed, the Harris is already after it. And I'd love that. I just couldn't get enough of it. And, back in the day, we would have a good average day. You get 30 slips in an afternoon on rabbits. They were just everywhere. And then it started dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And, it was later that I finally decided, well, maybe I ought to try one of these pointy wing falcon things and see how that goes. And that changed my life, actually. Once I got into that, I was like, there was no looking back at that point because rabbits had continued to fall off anyway. So I just went right to the hawk and ducks with falcons.
That's cool. Yeah, no, and as I've told some of these other guys that I've had conversations with here over the weekend, it's really hard for me to kind of wrap my head around the fact that people might have more like duck slips with falcons than, rabbits and squirrels and stuff, for example, because being in southern Indiana, right in the middle of the Midwest and stuff, it's like, that's all I have. We have mallards and things, but most of if you're going to really do much duck hawking where I'm at, it's going to be more like, ditch hawking or something with like, Harris's or Goshawks or something like that. And stuff with hawks, but not so much large falcons. It's not quite as conducive and it would just be, it's a lot harder trying to figure out how to make something like that work in my area. You almost have to hunt a different type of quarry like doves or, different things and figure out how to kind of circumnavigate that. And, so it's interesting talking to guys like yourself that have.
If I was living up in your area, I would, I really wanted to fly falcon. I would probably entertain snipe hunting.
Yeah.
With a cheersel.
Sure. And it's interesting that you bring that up because having seen snipe hawking now in a couple of different areas, I can see that being viable.
Absolutely.
The only thing that might make that more challenging where I'm at, though, is that most of the marshier type of fields and stuff that I know probably hold snipe, but I haven't seen them there. We bump snipe every so often when we're rabbit hawking in certain areas because of our fields and just our geographic layout. But like most of our fields that would hold snipe consistently are bordered right next to like small woodlots and stuff like that. So that might be the only thing. A little tight. Might be, you have to be really, really good setups.
I remember I read an article many years ago, a NAFA article, one of the hawk chalks, a guy from Indianapolis. He had no quarry up there for a peregrine. At least that's what he said, except pigeons. And so he started hunting wild pigeons and he perfected that and just got these kick-ass flights on wild pigeons. He said, when you're hunting wild pigeons, they already know where they know exactly where to go if they're pressured. So they're not going to have these long, huge tail chases out into the ether. The pigeons are going to go to cover pretty fast. And so they said the flights usually, were very manageable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I said, most of the areas, we do have pigeons in our area and stuff too, but it's mostly farm type pigeons and stuff,
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. He was hunting common pigeons.
Sure. And
he's finding them in fields. And then the bird understood to go up, which that's a whole process right there, teaching it. Don't go strafe them, just go up first and just come over just like you would for ducks.
Sure.
But he explained that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is another possibility where I'm at too, for sure. Most of the farm pigeons and common pigeons, like where I'm at in the farm areas, don't normally congregate like in the fields next to them and stuff, though. It's always right on top of the barns and everything else, next to the structures that, you know, your peregrine or whatever is probably inevitably going to kamikaze itself on, you know, whenever you try and kick some up. So once again, challenges, I haven't figured it out yet. Maybe someday. I'm more kind of into the other stuff right now, like squirrel hawking and dirt hawking. Maybe someday. We'll see.
You know, I caught plenty of squirrels when I was flying Harris's, but they're more incidentals because I had so many rabbits. Mm-hmm. But if the rabbit population ever came back in Texas, which not going to happen, but say if it did, I'd get another Harris hawk. Mm-hmm. I love those things. Yeah. I love doing that. My idea of a perfect day is go out and have a duck flight, and then on the way home, stop at your best rabbit field and go catch some rabbits.
Yeah. And I really envy guys like yourself that even can entertain that possibility, because where I'm at, it's almost, maybe it's just once again because I haven't, and most people in my area haven't figured out how to make that a reality yet with the circumstances that we have for our hunting spots. But being able to say, yeah, I'm going to fly my long wing and then come on the way back home, fly my hawk on rabbits, like that's just a total enigma to us. You know what I mean? Like it's not something that we can really.
Well, you don't have that. The situations that you have for ducks in Indiana, I'm sure are few and far between.
They are. And once again, I mean, it's mainly ditches and other, smaller type setups, a lot more condensed in a very urban
that's only
setting.
For as long as you have free water. Because once it freezes, that's it.
Yep. And it's very much it's very much an urban type deal, and not so much conducive for a long wing. I'm sure that there are farmers in many areas around where I'm at within an hour or so radius that probably have some cattle ponds and stuff, but they're so spread out.
The places to hit are dairies.
Yeah, and the quote unquote dairies that we have in our area, I mean, once again, super spread out. You wouldn't just be able to drive an hour and like have X amount of ponds within X amount of minutes of each other. It was just so spread out.
That's a good point. You bring up the logistics. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, for my duck hawking nowadays, I used to drive all over the county, so sometimes several counties looking for a duck slip. I just happen to have access to a ranch that's about 5 minutes from my house that has a lot of ponds on it, and they hold ducks, but I have to hike to them. So my typical outing is I will hike a minimum of about 3 to 3.5 miles, sometimes as many as 6 miles, because that's just, that's what I have to do to get to the ponds. And I don't mind that. I would rather do that than drive all over the county looking for a slip.
Yeah. And, we don't really have any what cattle farms and stuff that we do.
No, it's just not the right country.
No, it's not. And we don't really have, ranches, I mean, that's
and much less dock tanks.
Yeah, for sure. And anyway, yeah, I mean, but no, going back to the snipe deal, I think that you have a good point, and it's something that I've given thought to. I mean, if I could, whenever I'm ready, whenever I feel like I'm feasibly and logistically ready to possibly try another bigger long wing, say like a Tiercel peregrine or something like that, getting my hands on a passage and trying to spend the better part of the season before or something, being able to snipe out more fields that I know are going to...
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, being able to figure that out, that's probably going to be the next thing that I try, because I thought that was cool as hell whenever I watched it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, have you had any aspirations, or have you really done much other, hawking with long wings other than ducks? Or
I worked a corporate job all my career, and I was pulling all kinds of strings just to get those kind of flights. Had a family, and we were using up all of our vacation time for the family, so really didn't have an opportunity to go out for upland game. Nowadays, It's interesting how you evolve as you get older. You're like, man, traveling all the way up to Wyoming to hunt sage grouse. That's a big deal. And, you know, back in my 30s when I had, 40s when I had all that energy, yeah, I would have gone in a heartbeat. Now it's like, you know, I don't know. But so Corey Rolke, I'm sure you know him. Mm-hmm. He goes up every year for spring sage grouse hawking, and I'm not going this year because the finances aren't right. But next year I probably will. At least give it a shot to see what happens. So yeah, I want to do it more often. It's just that, you know, when I can get, well, let me actually take a step back. For me, the biggest deal, you know, flying a raptor is all about the relationship. Mm-hmm. You know, and making that bird successful and watching it improve. It's not about what kind of quarry I hawk. I mean, ducks just happen to be what we have. If we had something else, I'd be hawking that. If we had pheasant in the Dallas area, I would be hawking the heck out of those. But we just don't, so I just kind of do what I do. So I'm not the type of person to travel around the country pursuing other game, because what I catch is not as important as how I catch it. And, you know, does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, it makes total sense. I mean, you're just, I mean, all this stuff really revolves around prioritizing what we want. And,
that's it.
And, you know, just making what we think we want at any given time, because I don't know about you, but I know in even just my short time in this sport, what I've thought that I've wanted has changed significantly, even over just the few amount of years that I've technically been in it.
That's the beauty of falconry.
Yeah.
Especially early on when you first get into it, you don't even know what you don't know.
Oh, for sure. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, case in point, I mean, we think that we're going to want to do something, then we see it and we're like, you know, maybe this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Yeah. And vice versa. I mean, it took me 8 years, you know, I mean, just in recent years to really discover, you know, I should have been squirrel hawking this whole damn time, you know, like but once again, you know, whenever you're early on and you like you said, you don't know what you don't know.
I got a good story on that.
Sure.
I sponsored Gary Brewer once upon a time in falconry.
Yeah.
And he was struggling in East Texas. That's where he lives.
Yeah.
And trying to find the few rabbits that are out there. And he was catching a few here and there. He called me up one day and says, Don, I caught a squirrel today. And it was one of the best flights I think I've ever had. Mm-hmm. And I said, and he says, what do you think? And I said, well, what do I think? I mean, I think it's fantastic. Do you got a lot of squirrels out there? And he says, yeah, I got them everywhere. Mm-hmm. I was like, why the hell aren't you hawking those?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and he just took off with that. And of course, took it to a whole new level.
Sure. Well, and you know, I had a chance to talk to him about that. And, you know, once again, that was from an era though. And whenever that was technically considered taboo, you know, to some degree. And you know, but
I don't know why though. Cause you know, when I'd catch them, I don't know about you, but I love eating squirrel. Every time I caught a squirrel, that was definitely going into our pot.
That's funny. Yeah. I've had squirrel a couple times, and yeah, you don't want me cooking anything for you, you know, when it comes down to
yeah.
So, I mean, that's a whole other skill set in and of itself. One of the many things that I am not good at in life.
But I always consider squirrels just a great quarry.
Oh, for sure.
And I was all over that when Gary told me that he had caught a squirrel. I was like, great. Yeah, go after those things. Well, you know, you don't have rabbits, go after those.
Yeah. Well, and it all goes back to, you know, whatever you have the most of is what you should be hunting and picking.
What you have.
Exactly. But for whatever reason, it all goes back to a lot of the old, you know, stigmas and opinions and things, you know, and how those things evolve over time. Now, of course, it's nowhere, you know, near considered taboo anymore.
And actually, yeah, kind of a case in point, it took years for NAFA to actually have a pin for squirrel.
Hey, well, sure, at the meet and stuff.
It was an incidental.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, we talked about that a little bit too. Yeah. Whenever we had our conversation and stuff, but yeah, I mean, it's just, it really is interesting seeing the evolutionary process when it comes to how something like this that really truly is like millennia old, you know, and just seeing the differences and the evolution of something that it really is so old, it kind of makes you wonder, you know, I mean, it all goes back to the whole not reinventing the wheel thing, you know, I mean, something thousands of years, the roots of it has stayed the same, to
Really has.
to a degree.
We just have different
foundation.
technology around it, but
Sure.
it's the same process.
Sure. Yeah. Developing that relationship and stuff, and
Birds are still birds.
Yeah, exactly.
They
Yeah.
still have to be handled and treated a certain way, or you're not going to get any results.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, going back though, I mean, throughout the years, I mean, let's go a little bit into kind of how you got into all this and how you discovered it, and talk about that a little bit, because I mean, or a little bit more, I should say. And I mean, you were getting into it kind of, at an early part a little bit, when it was still kind of, with the rules and regulations and things were still
in a lot of states. There were no rules and regulations.
Exactly.
There were no federal protection,
Sure.
except for certain key species.
Mm-hmm.
There just wasn't. So I think I was in 6th grade. I don't know when that would be. It was the mid 60s, I'll say. And I wrote a book. I wrote a book report on falconry because I had seen this movie, The Vikings, on TV with Tony Douglas, I think, or Kirk Douglas. And it's funny. I've seen that movie since, in my in the last 3 or 4 years, and they have falcon scenes mixed with accipiter scenes.
Sure.
But I didn't pick up on that as a kid. But I just thought that was the neatest thing in the world. And so I looked it up and said, "Oh yeah, there's falconry." I wrote a book report on it, and I thought, yeah, that would be great to do, but I'm sure you just can't do that nowadays. So there was a local library, branch library in my neighborhood, and the librarian, I read every animal book in that little branch. She goes, I need to go down to the central library and get you something to read, don't I? I said, yeah, that would be great. So she brought me back this book called All Creatures Great and Small, and that's not the James Herriot novel. This is by Daniel P. Mannix. And it was this guy, very wealthy, lived back east, had all kinds of animals, had everything. Well, he also had those eastern peregrines. He had goshawks, and he had a golden eagle, and he had a bald eagle. And they would go down to Mexico. They had a place in Mexico, and he would bring his birds with him. He would catch iguanas with the 6-foot iguanas with the eagles. But I read that book from cover to cover, and it just ate it up. I thought, okay, people do this. So I knew at that point that I was going to be a falconer someday. I just needed the wherewithal. And it's funny, we'd be in family gatherings, and my aunts and uncles would say, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And expect me to say fireman or some ridiculous thing. And I'd say, I want to be a falconer. And they'd be like, I didn't know what that was, like, what is that? And I'm like, well, I'm going to fly birds. And I'm sure they're thinking, well, that guy's going to starve. But that's, yeah. So I knew that early on that I was going to be a falconer. I was positive of it first. So just about as far back as I can remember, really, that's all I've been consumed by it. Mm-hmm. I mean, consumed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to, once you get into it, like for people that don't understand, they're not going to understand, but if you have an inkling of even just the slightest sliver of interest in it, it is crazy how just all consuming it can be at times.
Yes.
It's easy to develop an obsessive, and for people that already kind of have an obsessive personality in a way, it's almost dangerous, I think.
It is. And I'm not as obsessive as I was, mm-hmm. but I'm still pretty obsessive.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also kind of comes with the natural maturation process of life too, and kind of how your personal life evolves around everything also. But I mean, it's just, for the people that make this the sum total of their whole life, good for them, I guess, but I mean, I can't justify doing that.
I never fell off the falconry deep end. And I have mm-hmm. friends that have, mm-hmm. They're either never married or divorced. No, that never happened. I was always able to kind of reel myself back a little bit, but I had a way of making things work too. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had a corporate job. I worked downtown Dallas. Mm-hmm. I would be at a pond at crack of dawn, get a flight, put the bird in the car. I'd have these overalls that were over my business suit, and I would take them off and wash my hands, get all the blood off them, and go into the office. I even figured out we have a big floodplain that goes through downtown Dallas where when the river floods, the Trinity River, when it recedes, it leaves all these pools, and they had ducks in them. And they had, back then, we could drive down the levees because they had this thing controlled by levees. And I would go look for ducks. I'd go out on my lunch hour and find duck slips and catch them on my lunch hour. Or if I had time, I'd go out and catch them after work, on the levees. I did all kinds of crazy. I mean, it's a wonder I wasn't fired, actually. But I did so many crazy things, pulling strings to get that next flight.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you were fortunate, because there's been some things that I've either been late to or missed or whatever on account of just, I don't know. If I was smart, I just wouldn't have flown on those particular days. But for whatever reason, it's just that compulsion. And
it's a compulsion. It's your irrational judgment.
Exactly.
That comes into play.
Exactly. But at least you were able to have that corporate job in that area, though, when that stuff was there, and that was kind of sustainable. I mean, what do you think you would have done had that not been there at that time? I mean, like, what if you were trying to do that now? I mean, would it even be possible?
It would be harder because the traffic is a lot heavier too.
Mm-hmm.
So it used to be I could, within reason, I could get to work pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to fly a pond before work. Now, if I were to try to fly a pond before work and then fight that traffic, I would definitely be an hour and a half late to work. So it'd be much harder to do it. You're right. Much harder.
Yeah. Yeah. You would have definitely been fired.
Probably. And actually, I'm retired now. I got through that whole thing and got the brass ring and the whole 9 yards and retired at 65. And now I'm hawking every day and I don't have to worry about, time frames or deadlines.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're where the ultimate goal and the pursuit of all this stuff ends up. And, it's good that you're there now. That's awesome.
Oh, it's great. Every day's a Saturday. I get up and I go, well, time to go hawking. How's the wind? Yeah, time to go hawking. Let's go. And I don't know if you ever, I post most of my seasons out on Facebook, and they're, it's people will joke about how I'll usually say, yeah, check this and check that. Not everything was quite right, but time to go to the field anyway.
Yeah, because you're looking at that sliver in the weather and like, okay, well, it might be sunny again, at this time. Might as well just go ahead and go because, whatever. What else are you going to be doing anyway?
Just last week we had it was supposed to rain. It was supposed to have a washout event. It was supposed to start raining around midnight and rain like through 3 or 4 o'clock the next day. I woke up that morning and it's not raining. And I get on the news, they go, oh yeah, there's another band coming and it's about an hour and a half away. And I'm like, I got time. And I was out there. I caught a duck with one bird, hustled back to the car, and ran to another pond. And she's on a duck. She caught one too, the second one. She's feeding up on a duck, and here comes the thunder. I can see it. It's dark. It's coming in.
It's rolling in.
Oh, God, I got to hustle back to the car right now or I'm going to get drenched.
Or electrocuted, one or the other. There's been some of those instances with me as well. It's just like, there's nothing, and then all of a sudden that wind picks up to a straight 40 miles per hour, and the sheets of rain start coming in with the lightning, and you're just like, all right, well,
I'm in the wrong place.
Push the envelope enough now, yeah. But we all have those instances, I think. But like going back to, we were kind of talking a little bit before the recording started, but about where was the process of things at? Like, how long was it before you kind of started? How many years had you been in falconry when you decided to kind of become involved in the process with kind of rejuvenating the state club and all that? And just talk about that for a little bit.
Let me tell that story. Yeah,
for sure.
So it was 1980. We were at the Alamosa NAFA field meet.
Mm-hmm.
And me and about 3 or 4 other Texas Falconers, we were, and one of them, you'll recognize his name, Bert Wassberg. You've probably heard of him. No? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, he was the first president of the rejuvenated THA. But he was a new guy. I mean, I met him at the Alamosa meeting. We became fast friends. He had just moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He had been going to school in Texas A&M down in College Station. So fresh out of college and starting his professional life. And we were crying in our beer. Back then, the NAFA meets, they had a keg on the opening night, on Sunday night, the meet and greet kind of thing. They had a keg. And so we're all sitting there drinking, probably half drunk, sitting around the keg. And we're complaining about how our falconry regulations were just so bad in that state. They were just, and the department just didn't even want to talk to us. It's just horrible. And Bert, he said, well, we need to get organized. And we all said, yeah, we need to get organized. We need to do this and make this happen. Because Bert he worked for Arthur Anderson, which is a consulting company. He had great communication skills. He knew how to do this kind of stuff out in both the written and the verbal. So we all said, yeah, let's do this. And then we all went home back to, after the meet and forgot about it. Well, not Bert. He called me up like 2 or 3 days later, says, okay, when are we going to start this? I'm like, what? Oh yeah, that. Okay, let's do it. And, then he knew some people up at the Colorado Hawking Club, and he got their constitution. Because the original Texas Hawking Association, it was really formed in basically just a very informal group of falconers, guys like Ken Carney, and a guy named Tom Buchanan, and Jim Ince, some of these old timers. They were the ones that got the original Texas falconry regulations installed in the 1970, I believe. But really, once they had finished their work there, then really it just kind of, they had nothing formal going on. However, then it was in 1976. That was the first year I had my apprentice permit. And by the way, back then in Texas, in Texas regs, you could have a Harris Hawk as an apprentice. So I was one of the only apprentices in the country that had a Harris Hawk, but that's another side. But they did pull all those old guys together again, because we had to go to the department, because 76 is when the new federal regs came in. Before there was no federal falconry construct at all. It was all just states. So I remember I just have been around, back from the Navy for like 4 or 5 months, and when we were all going down to Austin with these guys from the original THA, and talking with the department about conforming our Texas regs with the new federal regs that were coming in. So we did that, and then those guys disappeared. I mean, they just went off to doing their thing, and really the THA just existed in name only. Then it was in 81 when Bert and I and several others, resurrected it and actually put a constitution around that organization. Got it, took the Colorado Hawking Club's constitution and refurbished it or changed it up for Texas. I was working at a computer shop, and I ran. I got a list of all the falconers in the state, and I ran a labels program and sent out form letters to, typed up a letter and sent the form letter to every falconer in the state and said, hey, we want to reform the club, et cetera, et cetera. And we all kind of laughed about it as we were doing it. Yeah, nobody's going to answer us. We're not going to have any interest at all. Really, we thought but we in the letter, we invited everybody to come to, on a specific Saturday to a lake house on Lake Travis near Austin. And we just thought, yeah, there's going to be 12 people that show up. Man, we must have had 60, 70 people. And for back then, that was a lot of falconers. Mm-hmm. That was most of the falconers in the state. Everybody was charged up. Everybody else was thinking about that and not doing anything about it. So the fact that we got that going, everybody was 100% around doing that. So we got the club formed. And then Bert said, okay, we got to start working on a new proposal to change our regs. And he wrote this proposal up, and we vetted it internally and actually sent it to Parks and Wildlife to kind of get their thoughts before we actually went to our first commission meeting. But we got that passed, and it is in that revision that we got passage prairie falcons back. were able to take those. Not that I really had any desire to take one, but it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I've always been real progressive in that, if there's something we ought to be able to do, even if I'm not interested in doing it, I don't care. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people that do want to take advantage of that. So you're going to try to do what you can to, for the greater good.
Well, yeah. And conversely, along that same lines, like for what you already have legislation in place for to be able to have, when someone wants to try and take that part of that away or an element of that away, then getting that back is damn near impossible in a lot of instances.
It's hard.
Because, I mean, if they take one thing away, then they're also going to possibly try and take another thing away. And then another.
That's a constant thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've had so many tough conversations with other, people in other states about how their regulations have gone sideways. I said, well, what kind of rapport do you have with your DNR? And, do you have people, supporters within the department that are kind of watching out for your best interest, so that you don't get hit sideways by something? And not that it doesn't happen anyway sometimes, but yeah, it's a constant vigilance that you have to be engaged in.
Yeah, and I mean, like, even if something does end up happening eventually, you still got to be able to, in the end, look yourself in the mirror every day and be able to at least say that you did your best to try and prevent it from happening. But
so after we formed the club, when we reformed the club, we tried to resurrect this Falconry Advisory Council that was in statute, in Texas law, and the state really didn't want to engage in that kind of discussion. But we were, because it's in law that they had to meet with us. It wasn't really, even though you can technically have it on paper, but if they won't talk to you, if they won't really engage in meaningful conversation, you're not getting anywhere, right? I came along and as the president of the Texas Hawk Association in 1986, and me and another falconer, his name is Steve Olson, we started talking to other people, because the people that managed our falconry program in Austin, they just were not interested in doing anything for us. And so we actually started talking to some other people that were in power to do something about that, did an end run around that department. And overnight, we actually, Steve and I went to Austin and actually had some kind of confidential discussions with some of these other leaders in the Texas Parks and Wildlife and pled our case. And they were sympathetic to our cause. Overnight, we found our whole falconry program reporting to somebody else. And that guy, his name was John Herron. And man, he wasn't really that supportive of falconry itself. He's really more of a hardcore conservationist biologist. But he embraced the whole idea of responsible use of resources. And so he fought for us. And that's when we started making additional changes to the falconry regulations. We changed the falconry regulations at least 4 or 5 times and continued to improve them. I mean, one of our improvements was, I thought, if you want to breed your birds, your falconry birds, you ought to be able to do that under your falconry permit. You shouldn't have to have a scientific permit. What kind of BS is that? And we got that. It's in Texas regulation. It's just basically a paying $50 or whatever it is, the fee now. You can breed your falconry birds. Now, you still have to, at the federal level, you still have to get a federal scientific breeding permit. And I've suggested, I remember I was talking with, you remember George Allen? Does that ring a bell with you? Mm. So there have been so many changes over the years. I mean, I could talk about this for hours, man. There was one, the really big, huge overhaul of the federal falconry regulations that occurred about, I guess, 10 years ago. No, about 15 years ago. I talked to the guy that was making all these changes, and I called him up one day and I said, "Hey, why don't you establish a breeding permit under the falconry regulations?" And he said that one's a bridge too far. I just can't. There's too many politics within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Can't do it. And so he never would really support me on that one, but I'd like to resurrect that someday, if the political climate is right, and try to get that out from under scientific permits so that we can just breed our birds, period. and not have to worry about scientific permits. It's not a scientific endeavor. We're just breeding our birds.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's always a hoop of some kind or another to jump through, no matter what we do.
Well, and there are more hoops coming.
Yeah.
It never stops.
No.
I mean, right now, because I've been that group of falconers I talked about that regularly talks with the Parks and Wildlife. I mean, I've headed that group up since '86, so I know about all the politics that are going on in the state, and I know about all the politics that are going on at the federal level because Sheldon's got a lot of connections and gives me a lot of heads up, and other people too, as to what's happening. And they're at this time now, the feds want to take a closer look at our federal facilities requirements, and that could be a big deal if they decide to go in and overhaul those things.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, changing the guidelines of what a mew is, and the parameters of what constitutes and
how big it should be,
how big it should be, everything from the husbandry to the tethering process and everything else. All that stuff is already being looked at in other countries.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So that's the next big hurdle for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the hurdles only just they never get lower, and they never get less numerous, for sure. But
I think over time there'll be more and more barriers as hunting becomes less socialized in this country. I mean, just fewer hunters.
Mm-hmm.
Non-hunters are going to have less and less sympathy for what we do.
Sure. Well, and there's already like senators in other states and stuff too that are already starting to try and get bills and things passed that really have no basis whatsoever in any kind of scientific evidence or rationale and things. We can talk more about that here in a little bit. After we get done recording, I don't know if you'd heard about one in particular, but there's one in Kentucky right now that's trying to be introduced that just makes zero sense whatsoever. And
I've heard about it. I don't know the details, but I've heard about it. And
what's hilarious is the senator that's trying to introduce it can't even properly identify a red-tailed hawk or a Cooper's hawk or whatever. I mean, that's a whole other conversation in and of itself. But you did mention one thing in passing, and this is kind of how I want to transition to the next topic of conversation here. Is you mentioned in all of this legislative process and everything, you mentioned prairie falcons, and you mentioned there for a minute, it's just like, well, you never really would have considered flying one and all that, but then at some point you kind of did, didn't you?
Well, so I had an open slot, so to speak. I mean, I've been flying 2 falcons, and I had one that was killed by redtail. And so I had this open slot. It was in the middle of the season, and we were a good friend of mine, Steve Boyd. We were going to go to the one of the Lamar field meets. I can't remember which. It must have been like 96 or something like that. And he goes, "Well, hey, why don't we just trap a prairie falcon on the way up there or on the way back?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I guess so." I just let it go at the end of the season because it won't do anything. And I trained that thing up. We got one, and I trained it up. He actually so I don't know if I should talk about this in a podcast, but I learned from this gentleman how to seal a falcon.
Mm-hmm. So
we sealed it, and I trained it kind of like the old way.
Mm-hmm.
And that bird just she was just wonderful. Peregrines are kind of aloof a little bit. Prairie falcons are real animated, and once they decide you're okay, they actually, I think, go as close to loving you as a raptor can. That bird, I called her my Paris hawk because I could go out. I had her for like 3 or 4 or 5 seasons. It's always the good ones that their hunting career ends early.
Yeah.
But I could go out. I remember I could go out to this one. I had one area that had early season ducks. It'd be like 80 degrees, 85 degrees. I'd be out hawking ducks, in Texas. And if the flight, if she didn't catch a duck, if the flight fell apart, she'd be up there, 400 or 500 feet. I could get, some chunk of meat and put it in my fist and blow the whistle, and she would stoop from that position down to my fist. I mean, I've never had a falcon that would do that. She was probably absolutely my best falcon that I've ever had. She just had so much, because she had that passage knowledge. She had she could figure out a way to catch a duck on just about every kind of body of water it was. It's just a wonderful animal. I loved her so much. She was such a great bird. And didn't mind having a lot of people around, and just a great bird. Hunt hard. I mean, I remember one time we were trying to catch teal off a pond, and she must have stooped 30 times, trying to catch a teal off that pond. We never caught one, but somebody filmed it, and I was watching that film. It's like, oh my God, she really did put her heart into it. That's how they are. Prairie falcons are just unbelievable animals. She unfortunately caught the wrong duck in about her third or fourth season. It had fowl cholera, and that is terminal in falcons. They're dead 2 or 3 days later. And she was. Yeah, no,
I've talked about this in previous episodes that I've done, but that's how I lost the imprint. Tiercel prairie that I had was to a strain of bacteria from bagging on a duck, and that sucked. I had to, you spend, especially with an imprint too. I mean, you spend a few months or so, and you're finally to the stage where you kind of want to start really trying to hunt seriously and feel like you're there and stuff, and then you wake up one morning, walk in the next room, and you just see it laying there dead. It sucks. It sucks, and so sorry to hear that, in your case too, but.
What else are they going to say about her? Oh, so prior to that, hardly anybody flew prairie falcons in the state. There were a couple people here and there, but they kind of were low key. You didn't know really what they were doing. Mm-hmm. I remember this one particular meet. We had a number of Hal Webster was there, and Morley Nelson, some others, and we went out to catch a duck with my prairie falcon, and Jimmy Walker was there, and he was, he lives right over where all the prairie falcons are, but he was flying Harris Hawks, and it was an eye opener, because I remember we were flying 2 different ponds. There were ducks on 2 different ponds, and there was this dike in between them, and she just timed it just perfect. As they leapfrogged from one pond to the next, she just pegged one right there on the dike. Boop, and I remember just everybody, it's like this epiphany that people realize, oh my God, we got these great birds and nobody's flying them. And after that, people started getting prairie falcons and training them up and flying them, and doing, some didn't do very well, but most did. So I'm not crediting myself with starting a prairie falcon movement in Texas, but I was able to remind a lot of people that these things can really perform and do just as well as any other large falcon.
Yeah. Well, and since then, you flew several more after
I've flown at least 8 or 9.
Yeah.
If I count the passages and the eyes, and I've never had a prairie falcon that didn't turn into a good game hawk. They've all been great.
Interesting. Well, in your experience then, do you think that you would still prefer, you would prefer the passage over imprint then?
So here's the thing about So strangely enough, if you raise up an imprint and do it correctly, it will not scream. It never scream. It won't make a peep. But at about usually in the second season, they're getting their hormones, their adult hormones. They start to get aggressive. They view you as a tiercel, because I usually fly females. They view you as a tiercel. Everybody else is an interloper, and they just want to drive them out of the field. That's not workable, right? And I've seen that happen too many times. I've had too many IS prairies that just become vicious, later in life. If you take a passage bird, what happens on those is you have to lean on them pretty hard. You have to cut their weight. It's just a fact of life with prairie falcons to get them to do what they're supposed to do. And even if you don't have to lean on them that much, if you can pull that off, they will scream. They will start to scream. And I think that screaming is my opinion, that there's some sort of insecurity in the bird. It's a passage bird. It's really tame, but it's still a little bit fearful. And so that's just a kind of a nervous manifestation from that bird. I could be completely wrong. Now, what I think the sweet spot is taking a very late brancher, for lack of better words.
So it still knows what it is.
Or a soarhawk. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It knows that it's a bird, but it's going to get really tame. Mm-hmm. Probably not going to attack everybody in the field later. And it's going to be quiet.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard multiple theories. I mean, ironically enough, one of the only birds that I've ever had that my wife has actually liked and enjoyed having around was that imprint, Tiercel Prairie.
They're wonderful creatures.
You know, and I just thought that was just hilariously ironic, you know, that would be one of the only birds that I think it was because of that imprint personality aspect, and he was social, you know what I mean? He enjoyed people around, you know, including her. And, you know, she thought he had personality. That was her quote, you know?
Yes. No. Exactly. My wife is the same way. She loves my prairie falcons. They're all just have this personality. Whereas peregrines are kind of like, almost like machines. You don't quite know what's going on in their head. You know, if they're really mad at you, they're, you know, prairie falcon, if you push its buttons, you know, it's going to let you know in a pretty overt way. Peregrines might internalize that more.
So yeah, you know, you don't always know exactly where you stand per se
until you release that peregrine, and then you find out it's really pissed off that day.
It's going to take off for Mexico or whatever.
Go what I call a walkabout.
Yes, a sabbatical. Yeah, yeah, it's funny. Yeah, that was the only thing that occasionally drove me nuts. Which, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, imprint falcons always go through that stage where they want to venture out more and to some degree and check things out. And there were a few days where he decided just to kind of go on a walkabout sabbatical as well. And, you know, that led to me trying to get him back an hour and a half later because I had to cross a river that I had to drive 30 minutes to cross the bridge and so on and so forth. And I think everybody that has flown at least a couple of long wings in some capacity or another has had those experiences. But
I got a story on that.
Go for it.
I was training this IS, or I trained this IS female prairie, and we were catching ducks, you know, but she was still learning. And these caracaras came in and started harassing her, and a couple of marshhawks joined in, and she just went downwind. And it was this Thanksgiving morning, and my wife had invited like 30 people over to our house. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that bird just goes downwind because, and I didn't add, right when that's happening, here comes a front. Okay. So the winds go from like 10 miles an hour to like 20 or 25.
Sure.
And so, you know, here I find myself speeding, trying to keep this old school telemetry. I'm trying to keep up with her. And I remember I had driven like 30 miles and I'm getting a pretty strong beep. And I just ran over the side of the ditch, you know, and almost forgot to put my car in park, jumped out, and I saw this dot going across the sky like this, just going across this dot. And I started yelling, you know, whistling, and luring, because one thing about prairie falcons, they're good on their lure response.
Yeah.
And here comes that little dot, and it drops right. And I'm like, God, thank you, falconry God. and I remember I walked into the door just as everybody is sitting down to eat Thanksgiving dinner, and the look my wife gave me was like, so Kent Carney once told me, I never fly a bird if I've got to be somewhere, and I've always remembered that.
Yeah.
And so I don't. When I've got to be somewhere, I really think about it, you know, before I fly.
I've had two situations personally along those lines that, I rein myself in on days now that I have to, if there's somewhere that I know that I have to be, I know that inevitably something will go wrong on that day, and I don't do it anymore.
I used to be too anthropomorphic, thinking that oh, well, if I don't fly the bird today, it's going to be like, oh God, I don't get to fly today. Well, maybe I just don't want to do this anymore. That kind of thing. And I've come to realize, and this is my new motto, is the birds don't care.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't care. If you fly them that day, they're like, yeah, let's go do it. If you don't, and you just feed them up, they're like, I'm fine with that too.
Sure. They're getting fed either way. Yeah.
They don't care.
Yeah. It's, it really truly is ourselves that are our own worst enemies. And,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're the ones that are taking all the stress, not the birds.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. They're just the ones that cause us stress later whenever they completely screw us out of.
But I'm also a firm believer on routine and flying the birds as much as you can. Like for me in retirement now, I fly every day. Not that I didn't practically fly every day when I was working, but nowadays for sure, because I want the birds to fall into a routine and kind of know that I'm going to come and pick them up every day, and we're going to go out to our good spots and just fly. And I want them to catch ducks, not because I want to catch a lot of ducks, but because I'm a firm believer in success begets more success.
Mm-hmm.
It just continues to build and build and build to where they just think they can do anything. So that when you do have to do something really exceptional to catch that next head of game, they're all in.
Sure. Or at least more in than what they would be.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah. It's it's amazing what we put ourselves through sometimes with all this, but yeah, anyway, I mean, no, it's good stuff though. I mean, as far as, I don't know what in particular, if anything, did you do differently between all the different prairie falcons and stuff that you flew? Did you do anything different, like bird to bird? I know every bird is different and stuff, and you kind of have to have a semi-individual approach to each
every bird has
but,
their own buttons.
Sure.
And you want to push those.
Sure.
Right.
But I mean, you already kind of went into the whole little bit about, needing to really kind of lean on the passage birds, especially to kind of get going and
get
everything.
their attention.
Yeah. I mean, was what substantially after a point difference wise in the training methods and everything did you do with your approach with the imprints versus the passage after that certain, point where you're trying to train and free fly and everything else? So was there anything much different that you did or?
No. No. Well, so no, I really haven't. It's I use the same process, and the way I train my falcons is I don't have a drone right now. I've used kites in the past, but I will use a drone on the next time I train my next falcon. But whether it's an IS or a passage, while it's still on the creons, I hang a pigeon wing or a duck wing from a line that's either attached to the drone or, in my case, it'd be attached to the kite, and I teach it to go after that thing. And I don't like using a lure because I don't want to confuse the situation between a lure and the wing. The lure is like, come to me. The wing is like, go to that.
Okay.
And I teach them while they're still on the creons to grab that thing. With a passage bird, you've got to be a little bit more careful on when you take the creons off. IS birds, as soon as they got the concept out, you can just forget about the creons. And I get the birds going up like 200-300 feet, and then I try to get some flying mallards wherever I can find them, and serve a couple of flying mallards so they understand that. What I do is I hang the bait up there, and as they're headed up to the bait, I don't let them quite make it, and I yell and throw a duck up, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 flights, but they will figure it out. And once they've come down and done that, then depending on the situation, I may put the kite up over a pond. I've been told that it's illegal to do that with a drone. Although I would argue that if you don't have a camera on that drone and it's just really strictly just a lifting device, I would argue that in the spirit of the law, you're still in compliance, but who knows? I mean, I'm not going to test that. But I would put the kite up over a pond, literally, and it's hard to do. And especially with passage birds, this is useful. I'd get that bait up over the pond at about 200 or 300 feet. And as the bird is going up to the bait. And remember, the bird is already used to you. it's looking over its shoulder as it's going up to the bait because it knows you're going to throw something. It's not really paying attention to the ducks on the pond, the real ducks on the pond. But when I flush and yell, it's going to turn and look to see what I've just done, and it sees all these ducks flying off. Phew, and they take one. So that's how I train my falcons. 2 or 3 sessions like that, and they've got it. And now you can dispense with all that. Now you're just duck hawking. That's how I train all my falcons. I like to give them a lot of structure. Prairie falcons are really, as you know, are very prone for sitting. They like to sit, especially passage birds. When I train my birds to the kite like that, or to a drone, they never learn to sit. They just learn to go up.
And you already have it up in the air whenever you unhood and everything and ready to go. All right.
I unhood and they cock their head up and go, there it is. Yep, I'm out of here.
Yep.
And so that's how I've trained them. I train them all the same way.
Yeah.
Some of these guys that still go out and throw pigeons and all that crap, and I did all that. I threw pigeons back in the older days. Man, that can be risky too, because you get tail chases, and the bird catching a pigeon half a mile away, and all. You throw a bird that you thought was strong that's really turns out to be a dud, and it just flies at the ground.
Yeah.
So no, I don't really. I'm just. Oh, well, I'll tell you one thing I have had to do. I've had to compromise on this. Is so prairie falcons will always respond to a lure. They just love the lure. Doesn't matter what. These passage peregrines, at least the passage tundrias, they want a carcass. Once they get gamey, until they get gamey, they'll respond to a lure just like any other falcon. But when they get gamey, and they're catching ducks regularly, they have so much talent, and they really do. God, they're just all the stuff that the old guys, like the old guys, said about these passage tundrias. They were right. I found that out when I trained my first one. When they really get set on ducks, they know they have so much talent. The birds innately know they have so much talent that they cannot believe if a flight goes sour and there's no more ducks in the pond and they haven't caught one. They're like in denial. They're like, what? No, that could not happen. You better produce something else for me. And no stinking lure. I need a duck, and that's where a duck carcass, throw it out, and let them come into that carcass, and they come into that. I mean, I hate to say this. Unfortunately, I had a bird fly off today. One of my birds that will sometimes take exception to crowds, and it was really more the way I approached that pond today. I could have approached it a little bit differently and probably gotten away with the whole thing, but bottom line, she flew downwind. And she was out a mile or so, but the GPS was saying she was, way out, about a mile away. I couldn't see her with my naked eye, but I just started throwing a duck around, up in the air, and within 2 or 3 minutes, here she comes. That's on the duck. They want the duck. Yeah. So that is one thing I do differently. And I used to look down my nose at that, like, come on, you got to use a carcass to get your bird back. But now I understand.
Yeah.
Now I understand.
Yeah, we always there's always at least one guy usually anytime we go out and hunt. There's always one guy that keeps a Frosty the lure, in their bag, frozen rabbit or something, just in case, just in case. Never hurts to be a little overly cautious.
I also never go out to the field without at least one sealed pigeon in my bag.
Yeah. I mean, there's
and not a pigeon on a line. A sealed pigeon, because pigeon on a line, they don't. If the bird's really pissed off, they don't like that. They want something you can throw up in the air that's fluttering around, so they can come down and grab it and take it. Yeah.
Well, cool. No, that's a cool insight. That's like I said, I'm always interested to find out what guys have done over the years, especially guys like yourself that have flown several different, birds and stuff of right. Both the imprint and the passage variety and everything else. But I mean, before we start to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I mean, you've already told a few cool stories and everything, but everybody always has at least one or two really super ultra memorable, experiences that have kind of impacted, their falconry experience and everything. Like what are one or two of those that you can think of that really have just made an impression on you over the years?
I'll tell one.
Okay, go for it.
At least to start with. I may think of others in the process of telling it. I had a prairie falcon, Anais, that shattered her wrist. And I was told by, a good raptor vet that bird will probably never fly again. If it does, it's just going to barely be able to fly. And I said, well, any odds at all? He goes, 10%. And I said, well, okay, what do I have to lose? I'll try this. And so the rehab on that bird was unbelievable. I mean, because first you had to heal the wrist, and to do that you had to keep it the wing wrapped for weeks, and then once we took the wrap off, then I would have to forcibly extend the wing every day, and that would literally tear the tissue every time I do it, because the tissue is trying to heal in an abnormal way, and there'd be bleeding involved. And be warm water therapy. When that would happen, I would hold that wrist underneath warm water to try to lubricate the joint as much as possible. But we got to where we could extend that wing. My wife and I would do this. Eventually, it stopped tearing, for lack of I don't know if that's the right word, but I think it was. It stopped bleeding, and it started getting some real lubrication. So what I did, and then as part of the trauma, she lost two feathers, two secondaries and two primaries on either side of that break. I actually got some doorbell wire, and I made a brace, and I wired two different braces to the adjoining feathers to hold it, so that bird could fly, and I started rehabbing her, and it was a long, long process. But long story short, I remember, so I rehabbed her, up through the early to late spring, and then I had to just go ahead and mulch her. And I had to build a new feather bridge because it looked like those feathers were never going to come back into that joint, the originals. And that fall, I was trying to get her to go up, and she could fly a little bit, but there was just this one day we had this cool wind coming in, and she just got some lift, and she went up like 100 feet. And I served her something. I can't remember what it was, rewarded her. No, I had her on the kite. That's what it was. I had her on the kite. And that's when I thought, well, maybe I got something I can work with here. And so I kept raising that kite. I got her going up like 300-400 feet. We started hawking ducks. That season, I caught 50 ducks with that bird.
Wow.
She made it happen. But there was this one flight that I remember from her. She had kind of a gimpy flight. When she'd take off, this wing would be just a little bit weird until she got moving. And we were flying this big pond. I mean, like a dam that was like 100 yards long. But there were a lot of ducks, and there were wind coming out of the north over the dam. She came in and she was pushing the ducks, but they weren't flushing clean on her, and I could see she was getting tired, and I just I got the lure out. I was going to just call her back in, but nope. She kind of did the stair stepping kind of thing, and got back up to pitch again, and had me flush one more time, and this gadwall went over the dam, and it was a strong wind, and she flew that thing down in the wind, and it was just like almost a slow motion. She just couldn't hardly seem to catch up with it, but then she just reached out and she snagged it, and she got it and took it down. Now, I'll always remember that flight, because I was like, man, this bird really has come back. Now, unfortunately, a couple of seasons later, the arthritis in that wrist just got to be too much, and she just couldn't do it. Yeah. So I ended up giving her to a breeding project because she was laying eggs. Yeah, but that bird, just to her heart, the heart in that animal was incredible. I mean, I didn't give up, and I guess because I didn't give up, she didn't give up.
Yeah, and I find that interesting. I've noticed that a couple of the birds that I've flown, whether it be like a kestrel that I've flown previously, or some of these birds that you bring back from either some kind of serious illness, or like in your case, a wing break, or whatever the case is, they seem to perform even better for you. Like there's something that kind of triggers in their head that like they know that they somehow instinctually, maybe this is probably going back to a little bit more of the anthropomorphization of everything, but I think that there's some degree and something in their brain that knows that they would have died if it wasn't for your intervention, or would have been worse off. Maybe, I don't know.
Some sort of sense there.
Who knows? I mean, I don't know. I could just be full of crap too, or just talking out my rear. But I don't know. I think that there's some degree of truth, or I don't know, something to that though. I don't know. And I've heard that from other falconers as well. I mean, birds that have kind of been on the brink, and for whatever reason, they turn out to be even harder performing birds.
I used to have a white gyr peregrine female. One of her eyes were put out by red tail, and a lot of people said, "I just get rid of that bird." But I stuck with her, and I flew her for 3 or 4 more seasons just with one eye, and she sorted it out. She caught lots of ducks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one other flight I'll describe. It just happened this year. So remember that bird I told you about earlier that had been trapped by another falconer. She was just a real slow learner.
Yeah, sure.
And this bird really was a slow learner. I mean, she's probably that part of that 75% that wouldn't have made it, in her first migration. But I was out flying her earlier this season, and she tail chased some ducks out of sight and I could tell from a GPS that it was over to another pond. And so the ducks put in over there, and we're talking like half a mile away. I'm not going over there. So I'm standing at the pond, and there's one gadwall left on the pond. So I'm just standing there very quietly, just looking at my phone, trying not to make any movements. That gadwall's still sitting there. And I just watched, and she finally breaks from that pond, and she had chased the duck upwind. The duck's upwind. So she's going to be drifting. She goes way up, and I can't remember how high it was, but I couldn't see her. I could tell she's drifting back toward me, and I'm just waiting and waiting. And eventually the dot's right above us, and I flushed, and it was like this bird just came out of the ether, just vertical stoop, pow, knocked that gadwall down and took it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's falconry right there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I wish I could see more of that. Maybe someday I'll get
Well, you don't get to see that every day, but every once in a while you have flights like that. Like, wow.
Well, the exceptional instances and the exceptional moments are kind of what makes us continue to
pretty much,
continue to chase the dragon, so to speak.
Yes,
but yeah,
I hope I can continue doing that for a little bit longer. I'm 69, so I figure I got bad knees, but I think I can maybe do this another 10 years. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, you're already the long winger that, that, like I said, most guys that they transition into long wing because of bad knees and stuff. At least you're already in it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, well, no, I mean, this has been a really cool conversation. I appreciate it, and lots of cool stuff and insights in it. And before we completely wrap though, I mean, you've already kind of had some good, nuggets of info and stuff, but I always like to get an important sentiment, piece of advice, whatever the case is, that from every falconer that I have on the podcast, that they might want to either tell current generations or future generations of falconers, just a food for thought, something to think about, something to pass along. Well,
okay, so every bird's got to come with his own set of problems, and he may have multiple sets of problems. Bruce Hawk had a statement in his book, The Hunting Falcon, said, sometimes falconers forget how to think. And so my advice there is that don't forget how to think. Think outside the box. Don't think in formula. Just because you do A and you do B and you do B, that does not mean that C will happen. It just doesn't. That's not the way it works in this sport. So you have to kind of just never stop trying to. Here's another way to put it. You got to get inside each of your birds. Got to get inside their head. What makes that bird tick? How are they seeing things? And try to help and try to manage them in such a way that their outlook becomes a success story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's good advice. Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is it's so easy to fall into the cookie cutter trap. Wanting to apply the same thing to every single bird, and I've been trying to be conscientious of that every passing season myself also. So it's good stuff.
And I just describe how, I've always used the kite to train, well, at least in the last 10 years on training my falcons, maybe 15 years. But every bird's going to be different. I mean, some birds, like, for instance, when you're picking them up after they've come down with the bait, some birds you can pick up differently than you can others. It's like you just have to figure out what each bird requires and respond accordingly. It's just hard, and a lot of people don't think about that kind of stuff. I see people handling their birds and they're just baiting constantly. And I'm like, that is just horrible. Every time I see a bait, and I'm not saying that it didn't happen to me. It happens to me more than I like to admit. But every time a bird baits, this according to, I learned this from Ronald Stevens in his book, Observations on Modern Falconry. He said, every time a bird is pulled up short, by a bait, via a bait, that the bird considers that an insult. You just insulted that bird. So Ronald Stevens, his main deal, he was trying to figure out how to train birds like a wild bird, train it without a bait. So the bird never even really realizes that it's restrained. Now, I've not been able to do that. But I'll tell you what I do try to do, and I'm not saying I'm successful every day, but I try. My idea, I'd love to catch ducks, but really my idea of a great session, a great hunting session, is to go out and pick that bird up from the block without a bait, hood it, go out and fly it, and then pick it up from the duck without a bait and hood it, and then put it back on the block with no baits. So the bird is not reminded in that session that it's restrained.
Yeah.
That's like nirvana. I have one bird that is pretty consistent about that sort of thing. I have the other bird is always testing me, but we should all be striving for that. So so my message to other falconers is do what you can to eliminate or at least reduce baits. You're going to have a happier bird. Happier birds will work with you and for you.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And yeah, I mean, this is, overall, man, this has been a real pleasure. I appreciate you giving me the time again. And yeah, I mean, I especially, things like prairie falcons and Cooper's hawks and some of these, I don't know, some of these birds that sometimes get labeled in a way of like almost being like the redheaded stepchildren of the
you just have to learn how to be polite to them.
Yeah,
that's it.
And it's always great getting insight on some of these species that's a lot of people seem to have trouble with, and stuff. So thanks again for the insight, and especially for the stories and the early years of the THA too. And I always like whenever a state is kind enough to bring me down and do a series for them and feature a lot of the falconers in their state, I do like to have at least one or two episodes that focus some on the club itself and the history, and I appreciate you expounding a lot on that as well.
Sure.
So yeah, but well, let's see what else we can get into. I'm sure there's more beer to be drank somewhere, or conversations we had somewhere, I guess, but
otherwise we just get out of the sport.
Probably. Well, like I said, thanks again, Don, and yeah, let's go find something else to get into.
All right.